Hello and welcome to Time of Death. I'm your host, Ris.
And I'm your host, Dee.
And if you're new here, welcome. We're two nurses that like to talk true crime. We like to focus on cases that have a heavy medical influence to them or cases that feature a medical professional as the perpetrator or victim. The case we're doing tonight actually occurred in May of 2023. So over a year and a half ago, but the trial just ended this month. And this case has been very publicized. There's been protests because of what happened in the case and a lot of differing opinions and sides on this case. So we're just going to break it down one piece at a time. What happened in this case, just a general overview, is a 24-year-old white male named Daniel. He was a Marine veteran, and he ended up on the same subway as a 30-year-old black male named Jordan. Jordan was suffering with mental illness, and he was homeless, and he, per Daniel and other subway riders, was acting erratically. And so Daniel ended up restraining Jordan with the help of two other people, and his cause of death ended up to be the chokehold that he was put in. So Daniel's trial just ended. We'll talk more about the findings and all the details throughout. Just a little bit about Daniel, the Marine veteran. He was not a native New Yorker. He had grown up and attended high school in West Islip in Long Island, New York, and he played lacrosse during high school. After graduating high school, he spent 4 years in the Marines. He received several ribbons and awards, and he was promoted to sergeant prior to leaving active duty in 2021. After his time in the military, he dropped out of college, and he had written on a website for those interested in hospitality work that he felt unfulfilled while he was in college. And he had chosen to drop out of school and backpack across Central America. In 2022, he worked at a surf shop in North Carolina, close by the last Marine base that he was stationed at. He was described as being a people person. He had an outgoing nature, and he was described as being pretty calm under pressure. He made a post on the hospitality website that his dream was to bartend in Manhattan. He said that connecting with people is his mission in life. So he moves to New York City to look for bartending jobs at this point. Jordan Neely grew up loving anime and video games. He was described as being shy. Family remembers him being cheerful and loving. Jordan's life was full of tragedy and letdowns. His mother was murdered when he was 14 years old.
Oh, gosh.
He had been living in Bayonne, New Jersey with his mom, Christy, and her boyfriend. And in 2007, she disappeared, and later her body was found in a suitcase in the Bronx, New York. The cause of death for his mom was strangulation.
Oh my God.
Her boyfriend was charged with murder, and later on, Jordan testified that his mom and her boyfriend fought daily and that it had been tumultuous. This obviously had taken a huge toll on him. The same year as his mother's death, Jordan was hospitalized for depression. He would later on be diagnosed with schizophrenia, demonstrated in symptoms of paranoia and hallucinations. He was also diagnosed with PTSD and autism, according to his family members later on. After his mom's death, Jordan ended up moving in with his grandparents briefly. He would cut school and act out, and he actually ended up threatening to kill his grandfather in 2010. After this, he ended up in the foster care system. Interestingly enough, and sadly enough, PTSD symptoms and diagnoses in children in foster care occur at a similar rate of that in combat veterans.
It's awful.
This population is especially vulnerable to mental illness. Referrals for mental health treatment are often convoluted and lengthy. Jordan's needs were dismissed by his foster care families and agencies. Larry was a man who grew up in the foster care system with Jordan, and he recalled that Jordan took care of other kids and he bought them food with money that he earned. Jordan attended Washington Irving High School in Manhattan, New York. During his time in school, he nurtured a love for dancing and was a huge fan of Michael Jackson, and he would specifically impersonate him. One of his classmates said that he was the Michael Jackson of Washington Irving, and he was referred to as Michael Jackson by his peers. Jordan ended up dropping out of high school. However, he still explored his Michael Jackson impersonations. He showcased his skills on social media through his performances in the subways. He would hang out with a friend on the subway train, and his friend said that everyone loved him. Over time, he acquired a following. At age 21, he was kicked out of foster care automatically due to aging out, and there was no resources to help him find housing or transition. From what I found, there was nothing. So he goes from having, unstable life, but at least a roof over his head, to having absolutely nothing and no resources to help. I think they gave him like a Metro card, and that's it.
It's very common when young adults, whether it's 18 to early 20s, once they age out, there are like support totally stops. And especially if he had like autism or underlying psychiatric illnesses like schizophrenia, he should have been connected with resources for that specifically, as well as, what was available to him in terms of like helping him secure a job, an apartment, because these kids don't have parents. They don't have families that, are there to support them and guide them.
Mm-hmm. New York City actually has a law. It's the right to shelter, where authorities must provide a bed for the homeless population, which was 70,000 at the time of this crime being committed. However, these shelters are overcrowded, unclean, and dangerous if they can even get in there. There are some shelters that are more or less specialized for those with mental health issues, but they are not equipped to care for these patients with severe mental illness effectively. There are some safe haven shelters where there are some psychiatric on-site resources available, but there are never enough beds. I think there was like 1,400 or 1,700 in 2023, like in May of 2023, and it compared to 70,000 homeless people at the time who, and a high amount of them are struggling with mental illness. Supportive housing is another option, considering whether space even is available. So they must stay in a shelter for 3 months prior to be able to apply. And on top of this, only 16% of homeless people actually get approved for supportive housing.
And you're living in an area that has some of the highest cost of living.
Yeah.
As well. Like an apartment where we are is not nearly, is a fraction of what some of the rents go for in New York City.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very expensive, and if you're thinking about it, like even with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's kind of where my brain went. Very basic needs have to be met.
Like Ris is saying, I think it's very true. You can't meet the more safety, security. There has to be food. There has to be shelter. There has to be warmth before you can realize that, people are able to work on themselves and really thrive.
Yeah, before they, or even like survive. But yeah, none of Jordan's basic needs were being met, and similar can be said for many of these people. So he was homeless after he was kicked out, and he was reportedly well known to social work teams that were put in action to help homeless New York residents. There is what's called a top 50 list for the city of New York, which includes the names of 50 residents who are most in need of critical help and treatment. A social worker that dealt with him in the past stated that Jordan had been taken to the hospital many times, sometimes voluntarily and sometimes involuntarily, for psychiatric or medical treatment. Jordan's family members commented that he had been struggling with more severe mental illness as of late, and that he had acted out violently in the past. He had been arrested more than 36 times. A significant amount of these were non-violent charges like trespassing or drug use, but 4 of these arrests were on charges of punching people. 2 of these events had occurred in the subway. Jordan also was noted to abuse K2, which is synthetic marijuana, and during his autopsy, he did come up positive for this drug. In 2016, Jordan was suicidal and threatening to people on the street, and he was taken to the hospital by police. In 2017, he told a doctor that being homeless and having to, quote, dig through the garbage for food made him feel so worthless that he contemplated suicide. By 2018, police were taking Jordan to the hospital every couple weeks. And in 2019, a social worker noticed significant weight loss, and around the same time, there was a report made by a booth worker that he had banged on the door to her booth, threatening to kill her. In 2020, he had become a client of an intensive mobile treatment team. We have these, I think, in other places besides New York. I know that we have them in my state. But their mobile crisis teams are sometimes run by either hospitals or nonprofits, and they're used to respond quickly to mental health emergencies. They go right to the scene of the mental health emergency. So they respond, and in 2020, they take him to Bellevue Hospital, and he stays there for a week or so. We don't know what contact, if any, that the treatment team had with him after this. However, it can be difficult for these teams to keep track of so many clients, and of course, there is a lack of resources for them as well. In 2021, Jordan punches a 67-year-old woman on the Lower East Side, and she sustained severe facial injury, including a broken nose. He was subsequently charged with assault, and then he spent 15 months in jail at Rikers Island. In February 2023, he pled guilty to this crime, and there was like a deal made. The deal was that he be sent to an intensive inpatient treatment facility in the Bronx, and in turn he would receive a reduced conviction. His part was that he avoid drugs and then take his mental health meds and not leave the facility without permission by staff. Unfortunately, 13 days after he arrived, he abandoned the treatment facility. And after that, the judge issued an arrest warrant that would never come to fruition. In March, a social worker sees him on a subway train. He was calm at the time and well kept. They arranged for a ride to a shelter in the Bronx. And in April, social workers went up to Jordan to speak with him while they were in a subway car. And Jordan ends up urinating in front of them. And one of the social workers calls the police, and Jordan shouts at her, "They wait until they get here. I got something for you. Just wait and see." According to the social worker's notes, his behavior was aggressive and threatening, and they had written he could be a harm to others or himself if left untreated. Police respond, and I don't know if they didn't see that he had a warrant, but nothing, I don't think, ever really happened that I could tell. So on May 1st, 2023, Jordan enters the subway underneath Manhattan. He was demonstrating erratic behavior on the train. He threw his jacket on the floor. He was shouting at train riders that he was hungry, he did not care about going back to jail, and that he was ready to die. Later on, some riders report to 911 operators that he tried to attack people on the train or that he began threatening people. And several riders reported feeling nervous or in danger. Later on, we find out that he was unarmed, and several other riders come forward saying that he didn't touch or even approach other riders. However, his movements seemed erratic and a little threatening from what I saw. One mom said that he made lunging movements that prompted her to put her son behind her. And Daniel ends up approaching Jordan from behind and puts him in a chokehold. And the two of them end up on the floor, and they remain like this for 6 minutes. At one point, Jordan taps on a witness's leg and gestures to him. Another passenger recorded the altercation. A couple of the other passengers aided Daniel in restraining Jordan. Jordan thrashes around for a while before his body falls limp. Daniel holds him in the chokehold still for another minute or so. On the video footage, you can hear someone saying, "He's dying, let him go." One of the people who were helping to restrain Jordan claimed that he told Daniel to release him. A man named Johnny entered the train car while this was going on, and he said that when Jordan's body was released, Jordan's eyes were open and his body was limp. Daniel stands up and Johnny tells him to put him on his side, stating, "Don't leave him on his back, though, man. He might choke on his own spit if you put him on his back. Put him on his side." So one of the men that were helping Daniel turns the man onto his side. During the trial, using police body cam footage, it's unearthed that Jordan was still alive when police got there. NYPD officers bend down and are able to successfully palpate a pulse. Medics come and transport Jordan to the hospital, and he was pronounced dead. Daniel claims to police that Jordan had been threatening to kill people, and the reason he put him in a chokehold was to de-escalate the situation prior to police arrival. When asked why he held on after the train stopped, he said that he wasn't sure if the doors were open and that Jordan would still squirm every so often. One sergeant chimes in later on that when properly done, this chokehold technique knocks out the enemy. This chokehold that he was in was similar to what is taught to Marines, from what I read. It's called a blood choke, and it cuts off blood flow and therefore oxygen to the brain within 8 seconds. They are taught not to squeeze the windpipe while choking them because of the risk of injury to one's airway. A combat instructor said that Daniel had misused a chokehold technique that is taught to Marines. There, of course, was a lot of outcry on this case for various reasons surrounding topics of race, homelessness, mental illness, and crime. The question that arose was whether or not this was a person who stood up for other riders and stopped someone who was potentially violent, or was it an overreaction on Daniel's part to someone struggling with mental illness? In other words, were Daniel's actions justifiable? So during the trial, Daniel was charged with second-degree manslaughter. This has a maximum sentence of 15 years. And he was also charged with criminally negligent homicide, which has a maximum of 4 years. Daniel pled not guilty to both. He claimed that his actions were in self-defense of himself and other train riders. He said that he didn't intend to kill Jordan, just to incapacitate him. Prosecution argued that Daniel went too far to neutralize Jordan. They said that he was indifferent and had ignored basic precautions. They also brought forward the question that if his intent was to protect, why did he continue the chokehold after they stopped at the next station, mere seconds after he initiated the chokehold? Defense disputed the ME's finding that Jordan's cause of death was the chokehold. They said that Daniel had not applied enough consistent pressure to kill Jordan. Their medical expert said that Jordan died from a combination of things: the effects of K2, schizophrenia, the struggle in restraint, and a medical condition he has called sickle cell anemia. Daniel did not testify. Some of his relatives, friends, and other Marines testified that he was an upstanding, empathetic person. One witness, a 50-year-old male, denies feeling threatened by Jordan at all and reports that he asked Daniel repeatedly to release Jordan from the chokehold. However, another witness was a 19-year-old high school student. She said she had taken a short clip of the chokehold, and she said that Jordan stuck his hand in the closing doors to get them open, and that he claimed in an angry tone that he had no money, was homeless, and didn't care about returning to jail. She claimed that she was so nervous because of his tone that she felt she was going to pass out. So she put her head in her friend's chest until she heard the bodies hitting the floor. Another witness, a 59-year-old male journalist, recorded another video of the altercation. He claims that Jordan made the same statements that the last witness made, that he was hungry, that he was ready to die, and that he didn't care about going back to jail. Jurors said that they could not come to a unanimous verdict on the manslaughter charge. This is the 15-year sentence, the longer sentence. And prosecution requested that the lengthier manslaughter charge be dismissed, and it was. When trial ended a few days later, Daniel was found not guilty of the second negligent homicide charge. Supporters of Daniel cheered as the verdict was read. Jordan's father and those who believed Daniel was guilty were visibly upset in the courtroom, and his father needed to be escorted out after cursing loudly. And then Jordan's father filed a wrongful death suit against Daniel. So we'll keep an eye on that and see where that leads.
Where was Jordan's dad throughout Jordan's life? That now that Jordan has passed away, now he wants to be involved. I think that's very telling.
Yeah, I don't really know.
But what I will say, this is my psych nurse, I think that, the psychiatric care as a whole in this country is appalling. Am I surprised that this young man, slipped through the cracks of the system? No, I'm not surprised. Do I think race has something to do with it? Absolutely. I think people who are not Caucasian, who are minorities, oftentimes have disparities of care. What I will say about this case, without getting really into it, is that the best indicator of violence for someone in psychiatry, and this is a universal thing, is a history of violence. Which it sounds like there was a significant history. And, you could still posture aggressively. Does that really warrant what happened for him to lose his life? No. Do I think it was intentional? I don't know. I wasn't. I'm just going based off this. And I think that this is such a controversial case that this literally nearly hung a jury.
Yeah.
So I think that it really depends on the way that you look at it. I know personally I have my views that I won't get into. But, I think that those are just some considerations that should be addressed.
Yeah, those are my same thoughts too. I think that this was a huge failure in the mental health system, and taking care of these people who are clearly struggling and need more help than what they're getting. The mental health system on a whole clearly failed this poor man, and it's just a very, very tragic loss. Very sad case. Let us know your thoughts on this case. There is a lot to it, so I think that's it.
Ris, great case. Excellent. And I like that you were able to break everything down objectively, because a lot of the things that I'm seeing in terms of coverage are very skewed to one side or the other.
Yeah.
So I think you did a great job in being objective.
You know me, just delivering the facts.
It's not always easy to be objective. We have our natural experiences and insights from our life. And, it's really important, I think, for people to kind of look at it and try to look at it from both sides.
Well said, Mom. Well said.
All right, we're going to call it. The time is 21:05. That is 9:05 for all of you non-military, non-medical people. And I hope you enjoy this time with your family and friends, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye, guys.
Bye.